Warhammer 40,000 is a universe where humanity's empire spans 1,000,000 worlds, and every single one of them is fighting for survival against horrors that make cosmic nightmares look tame. But even in a setting defined by endless war and suffering, some events stand out as genuinely disturbing. Things so dark that they make fans who've spent years in this universe stop and say, "Wait, what?" That's why today I'm breaking down the 10 most disturbing events in Warhammer 40,000 and everything we know about them, starting with something that absolutely nobody talks about enough. The Daemoncolaba. Warsmith Hanso is either the most pragmatic Chaos warlord in the galaxy or the sickest bastard who ever lived, and I can prove it. Before you dismiss this as typical Chaos corruption, hear me out. What Hanso created on the demon world of Medrengard wasn't just evil. It was systematic industrial-scale body horror that served a specific purpose. Manufacturing new Chaos Space Marines after he stole Gene Seed from the Imperial Fists. The Daemoncolaba project represents everything wrong with the fusion of ambition and absolute moral bankruptcy. Here's how it worked. Human female slaves were rounded up and shackled naked inside iron cages. They were force-fed nutrients specifically designed to cause their bodies to bloat to grotesque proportions, widening them until their limbs became semi-atrophied and nearly incapable of movement. These women couldn't resist. They couldn't escape. They could barely move under their own mutated mass. But that was just the beginning. Members of the Dark Mechanicus, called Savage Morticians, used surgical techniques and chaos sorcery to radically alter these women's internal biology. They embedded stolen gene seed deep inside them, rewired their chemistry, and turned them into what the Iron Warriors called Daemoncolaba, living birthing wombs for new Chaos Space Marines. The actual process was a reverse C-section. Once a woman was deemed ready, her stomach would be split open and an adolescent male would be forcibly shoved inside. Then the wound would be sewn shut, trapping him in this grotesque womb. Over the course of just days, the boy would be transformed by the gene seed and emerge as something new. Here's where it gets worse. The reborn candidate emerged completely skinless, every nerve exposed, every muscle visible. If he survived the metabolic shock of the process, he'd be inspected by the Savage Morticians to determine if he was worthy to join the Iron Warriors. Most weren't. Most were horribly mutated by the transformation and deemed failures. And what happened to the failures? They were literally flushed through the sewers of Hansu's fortress to die in the wastelands of Medrengard. Skinless, mutated, abandoned. Some actually survived and banded together as a tribe called the Unfleshed, scavenging in the wasteland and dimly remembering they were once human. But the successful candidates faced their own horror. They needed skin. Where did the Iron Warriors get skin? They had farms, literal farms, where human slaves were force-fed the same way the Daemoncolaba had been, bloating them until their skin stretched to enormous proportions. Then industrial liposuction devices would remove the fat, leaving these victims holding sheets of their own skin to prevent themselves from tripping on it. Then they were marched to platforms and flayed alive. The skin was stretched between poles to dry in Medrengard's desert conditions. Once dried, it was cut into patches and surgically stitched onto the skinless Space Marines, cross-stitched like fabric onto exposed muscle and organs. The Daemoncolaba themselves, if they survived the birthing process, which many didn't, the cycle would begin again. Hours or days later, another boy would be implanted. This continued until the woman finally died from trauma, blood loss, or botched surgery. Then she'd be unceremoniously replaced and potentially recycled for whatever genetic material the morticians could extract. Here's the thing that makes this genuinely one of the darkest elements in all of 40k. The women were kept conscious. The drugs administered to facilitate the process had the side effect of keeping them alive and fully aware during the entire ordeal. They felt everything. They knew what was happening. Some accounts suggest fragments of their consciousness remain even as their bodies were used as biological factories, trapped in endless cycles of violation and pain. Captain Uriel Ventress of the Ultramarines eventually discovered and destroyed the Daemoncolaba project with help from the Unfleshed themselves. But the fact that it existed at all, described in detail in official Black Library novels, shows just how far the grimdark setting is willing to go. This isn't background lore mentioned in passing. This is a major plot point in published fiction that readers had to process. Even in a universe where servitors exist and virus bombs are standard Imperial equipment, the Daemoncolaba stands apart. It's one of the few things that makes even veteran 40k fans recoil and question if the setting went too far. Because at least most Warhammer atrocities serve the cold logic of war or survival. The Daemoncolaba was efficient, yes, but it was also designed with a level of cruelty that feels almost vindictive, like suffering itself was part of the manufacturing process. And if you think forced biological horror is disturbing, wait until you hear about the moment 3 entire Space Marine legions were betrayed and slaughtered by their own brothers. ISS TVANV. The drop site massacre makes every other betrayal in Warhammer 40,000 look like a minor disagreement. This was the moment the Horus heresy became irreversible, and when brothers learned they could no longer trust anyone. Before you assume this was just another battle in a civil war, understand the context. This was 006.M31, barely months after Horus's treachery was discovered. The Emperor, agonizing over his most beloved son's betrayal, ordered 7 full Space Marine legions to the Eastvan system to bring Horus to justice. 7. That's nearly half of all Space Marine legions in existence at the time, representing hundreds of thousands of the Emperor's finest warriors. The plan was simple. Overwhelming force would crush Horus before his rebellion could spread. The Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard would make the first assault wave. The Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion would follow as the second wave to provide reinforcements and ensure complete victory. Except 4 of those 7 legions had already turned traitor. Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, driven by rage at Fulgrim's earlier betrayal, led the first assault. His anger made him reckless. He drove his legion forward with 30 full companies of Terminators in a devastating charge against the traitor positions at the Urgal Depression. The Salamanders under Vulcan and Raven Guard under Corvus Corax supported the assault, and for a time, it appeared the Loyalists were winning. The traitors seemed to be falling back. The defensive lines were crumbling. Horus's gambit appeared to be failing. Then the second wave landed. The Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion deployed behind the Loyalist forces and opened fire. Imagine being a Space Marine fighting your way through enemy fortifications, trusting that your brothers are protecting your rear. Then suddenly, bolter fire is cutting through your ranks from behind. You turn and see Space Marines in the colors of friendly legions systematically executing your battle brothers. The confusion alone probably killed thousands before they even understood what was happening. This wasn't the chaos of battle turning against you. This was calculated murder. The traitor legions had positioned themselves perfectly to create a killing field. The Loyalists were caught between Horus's forces in front and their reinforcements behind. Overlapping fields of fire from both sides created a massacre that defied comprehension. More than 90% of the Loyalist forces deployed to Istvan Phosphor died that day. 90%. 3 of the Emperor's Space Marine legions, the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard, were functionally destroyed in just a few hours. These weren't raw recruits or undisciplined militia. These were gene-enhanced super soldiers. The best warriors humanity had ever created, and they were slaughtered wholesale. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, was killed in single combat by Fulgrim, his own closest brother. Fulgrim wept as he beheaded Ferrus, but he did it anyway. That moment, captured in official artwork and described in excruciating detail in Black Library novels, represents the ultimate fracture of brotherhood. The 2 Primarchs who had once been inseparable now stood on opposite sides of a war that would burn the galaxy. Vulcan was apparently killed in a cataclysmic barrage from Iron Warriors artillery, though he actually survived as a perpetual who could resurrect, but his legion watched their Primarch disappear in atomic fire, believing him dead. Corvus Corax barely escaped with a fraction of his Raven Guard, hunted through the killing fields by traitor forces. The drop site massacre achieved several things simultaneously. It revealed the full scale of Horus's rebellion, not 3 or 4 traitor legions, but 8 or 9, not maybe more. It removed 3 entire Loyalist legions from the board before the war truly began. It shattered any illusion that this conflict could be resolved peacefully or quickly, but the psychological damage was worse than the physical casualties. Space Marines are conditioned to be absolutely loyal to their brothers. The entire structure of a legion depends on trust that the Marine beside you will die before letting you fall. Istvan Fi shattered that trust permanently. After the drop site massacre, every Loyalist Space Marine had to consider the possibility that the warrior next to them might turn traitor. That paranoia would define the rest of the heresy. The survivors formed what became known as the Shattered Legions, small warbands of Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard who refused to accept defeat and waged guerrilla warfare against the traitors throughout the heresy. They fought without central command, without hope of reinforcement, and without any expectation of survival. They fought purely out of spite and vengeance for their murdered brothers. Istvan V was the moment the Horus heresy became inevitable. Before that day, there was still a chance, however slim, that Horus could be brought back from the edge. After it, the only path forward was total war. 10,000 years later, the Imperium still remembers Istvan V as the ultimate symbol of betrayal. The black sand of that killing field is considered cursed, and the memory of Space Marines shooting their brothers in the back remains the darkest stain on the honor of the Astartes. But at least those Space Marines died in battle. Some fates in the Imperium are worse than death, and one of them is so common you probably walk past victims every single day without realizing they're still aware. The Servitors. Servitors are everywhere in the Imperium. Billions of them work in manufactorums, assist tech priests, serve as gun platforms, operate medical stations, and perform every menial or dangerous task imaginable. Most Imperial citizens see them as barely more than machines, lobotomized cyborg slaves with just enough brain function to perform their programmed tasks. But here's what makes servitors genuinely disturbing. Some of them are still in there, still aware, trapped in their own mutilated bodies with no way to scream. Let me explain how servitorization works. A human, usually a criminal convicted of offending the Adeptus Mechanicus or committing serious crimes, is sentenced to servitude in perpetuis, perpetual servitude. They're taken to a Mechanicus facility where surgeons systematically destroy their higher brain functions through lobotomy. Memory, personality, self-awareness, emotion, all of it surgically removed or chemically suppressed. Then the augmentation begins. Depending on the servitor's intended function, their body is modified with tools, weapons, or equipment. An industrial servitor might have their arms replaced with hydraulic lifting rigs. A combat servitor gets a heavy boulder grafted where their arm used to be. Medical servitors are mounted into wall niches, reduced to a human torso and head connected to surgical equipment. Their bodies become tools, nothing more. The Imperium treats this as mercy. Better than execution, they say. The criminal's body serves the Emperor even if their mind is gone. Clean, efficient, the ultimate rehabilitation through obliteration of self. Except the obliteration isn't always complete. In the game Warhammer 40,000, Darktide, players interact with medical servitors at healing stations. These servitors speak, and what they say is horrifying. Please take me with you. Help me. When the station runs out of charges, they beg about feeling their minds slip away, about being so lonely. These aren't pre-programmed phrases mimicking distress. These are fragments of human consciousness trapped inside lobotomized shells, aware enough to understand they're slaves, but not capable of doing anything about it. Author Matthew Farrow describes the internal experience of a servitor in his short story, Memories of Flesh. The servitor's fragmented mind experiences cutting, ripping, unutterable pain, flashes of memory from before their conversion, a voice that it doesn't remember owning, screaming for mercy, the towering figure in power armor watching impassively as the servitor, who used to be someone, is dragged out of its lacerated mind. No ability to understand the images, no consciousness to process what happened to it. The worst part, this happens, not in every servitor, but often enough that it's documented in official sources. Physical trauma can cause fragments of the servitor's original personality to resurface. The altered and fragmented brain tries to assert some form of awareness. Some servitors go into mind lock, babble in incoherent nonsense as they struggle to become conscious. Others simply repeat, "Help me," over and over. Sometimes a rogue servitor becomes aware enough to recognize itself as a slave and its owner as a slave master. This can result in the servitor killing their master. Other times, upon gaining cognizance, the servitor might decide to befriend or faithfully serve their master despite understanding their situation. There's documented cases of servitors who retain enough consciousness to feel gratitude toward kind owners and hatred toward cruel ones. The Imperium knows this happens. It's not a secret. They just don't care. If a servitor becomes too aware, it's either rewiped or destroyed and replaced. The concept that these cybernetic slaves might still be people trapped inside their own bodies is irrelevant to Imperial doctrine. In fact, some interpretations suggest it's intentional, that the suffering is part of the punishment. In the novel series featuring Olanius Person, there's an agricultural servitor named Graft who had clearly retained enough personality to form a relationship with his owner. But most servitors aren't that fortunate. Most are industrial equipment that occasionally glitches into brief moments of awareness before being shut down again. Scale this horror across the Imperium. Billions of servitors. How many are partially aware? How many spend decades or centuries performing repetitive tasks with fragments of human consciousness, screaming inside a prison of lobotomized brain tissue and mechanical augmentation? How many medical servitors mounted in walls watch Space Marines walk past, unable to ask for help, unable to even fully comprehend why they want help? And it's normalized. Completely, utterly normalized. Every administrative building has servitors. Every Forge world runs on them. Every Space Marine chapter uses them for maintenance and menial labor. Even failed Space Marine aspirants can be converted into servitors. Imagine surviving the horrific process of gene seed implantation, only to have your mind destroyed and your enhanced body turned into a gun platform. One particularly grim example, a Crimson Fist scout who fired when ordered not to, leading to the death of a captain and 80 Space Marines, was lobotomized and served as a gun servitor. A Space Marine, one of the Emperor's Angels of Death, reduced to a weapon mount that might occasionally remember being a warrior. The Imperium calls this justice. They call it practical. They call it necessary because they refuse to use artificial intelligence after the Men of Iron Rebellion, but artificial intelligence would be less disturbing than this. At least an AI doesn't suffer. At least in I wasn't a person who had their personhood surgically removed while fragments of consciousness remained to experience the aftermath. Servitors are the perfect metaphor for the Imperium itself. Brutally efficient, completely normalized, built on suffering so pervasive that nobody even questions it anymore. And somewhere in that lobotomized mass of meat and machinery, a fragment of a human being might still be aware enough to beg for help. But if you think industrial slavery is disturbing, wait until you hear about the infection that turns entire planets against themselves over generations. The KISS. A single genestealer can doom an entire planet. One creature, one infection. That's all it takes to trigger a multi-generational nightmare that ends with billions of people willingly sacrificing themselves to feed a hive fleet. Before you assume this is just alien infiltration, understand how insidious the genestealer infection actually is. It doesn't work like a virus or plague. It works like destiny. Once that first infection occurs, the fate of everyone descended from that victim is predetermined by their genetics, and there's no cure, no treatment, and no escape. Here's how it starts. A genestealer, whether from a space hulk, a hidden cult, or Tyranid vanguard organisms, implants a victim using its ovipositor, sometimes called the genestealer's kiss. This tube-like tongue inserts a tiny embryonic organism containing the genestealer's genetic material directly into the host. The victim doesn't die. They don't transform. They just change. Over time, the organism alters the host's genetic code at the cellular level. Their consciousness is completely suppressed by a localized version of the hive mind called the brood mind. They become a virtual slave, but they don't know it. They think they're fine. They think their thoughts are their own. They go home to their families, go to work, live their lives. Then they have children. Those children are genestealer hybrids. First-generation hybrids are monstrous, grotesque mixtures of human and xenos features. Extra limbs, alien biology, horrifying to look at. These hide in the shadows, in underhive tunnels, in places where normal humans won't see them. But they're still connected to the brood mind. They're still loyal to the patriarch, the original genestealer that started the infection. Second-generation hybrids are slightly more human-looking, but still obviously wrong. Third generation can pass as heavily mutated humans. Bald, pale, might hide under robes. But fourth generation hybrids, they look almost completely human. You could work beside one and never know. They infiltrate planetary governments, astro-militarum regiments, industrial complexes, even ecclesiarchy positions. Then the fifth generation is born. Pure strain genestealers, genetically identical to the original creature that started the infection, but carrying some traits from the host species. These pure strains can start the cycle again on other worlds. But here's where the true horror begins. The genestealer cult grows over generations, recruiting from the downtrodden and desperate. They promise liberation from the brutal yoke of imperial rule. They speak of the star children who will come from above and bring salvation. They build genuine religious fervor. These aren't mindless drones. They're true believers. The cult offers hope to people who have none. In the lowest levels of hive cities where life is cheap and suffering is constant, the cult provides community, purpose, and the promise that one day, Gade will descend and make everything right. People join willingly. They believe. They worship the patriarch as a god or father figure. And over generations, the cult grows to billions of members, sometimes covering multiple worlds. The entire time, the patriarch's psychic presence acts as a beacon in the warp. The Tyranid hive fleets traveling through space searching for worlds to consume see this beacon like a lighthouse marking biologically rich feeding grounds. When the hive fleet gets within a few hundred light years, it's something triggers in the brood mind. The cultists go into a frenzy. They launch their uprising, weakening the planet's defenses, sparking civil wars, sabotaging infrastructure. They think this is the beginning of their salvation. They genuinely believe the star children are coming to uplift them into a higher existence. Some cultists actually see Tyranid ships descending and weep with joy. Then the truth arrives. When the hive fleet gets close enough, the hive mind, vastly more powerful than the brood mind, assimilates the cult's psychic network. Many cultists die instantly from psionic shock. Their minds just burn out from the sheer alien magnitude of the hive mind. Others are freed from the brood mind's control for the first time in their lives, only to go mad with horror as they realize what they've done, what they brought to their world, what's about to happen to everyone they love. The remaining cultists become puppets. The hive mind exerts its will directly, forcing them to fight harder, move faster. It burns out their bodies, harvesting every flicker of bioenergy to reinvigorate the actual Tyranid organisms. With each tug on the synaptic leash, the cultists die a little more. Their muscles tear, their organs rupture. The hive mind doesn't care. They're fuel, nothing more. Once the planet's defenses are destroyed, the patriarch and pure strain genestealers turn on their own cult. without hesitation. The creatures they worshipped as gods massacre them wholesale. Then the Tyranids consume everything, every cultist, every hybrid, every victim of the cult's uprising. Every defender who fought against them, all of it gets processed into the reclamation pools and digested by the Hive Fleet. The cultists who spent their entire lives working toward this moment get recycled alongside the Imperials they fought against. The genetic material they carefully preserved over generations gets dissolved in the same vats. Their devotion, their faith, their sacrifice meaningless. They were tools, biological Trojan horses, and when their purpose was served, they were consumed. Some cultists escape. They flee on refugee ships, taking their infected genetics with them. And on whatever world they settle, their children will birth new hybrids. The cycle begins again. This is multi-generational horror. A great-grandfather infected by a genestealer dooms his great-grandchildren to die as puppets for an alien hive mind. And the cruelest part? Most of them never knew. They lived entire lives thinking they were freedom fighters, revolutionaries, chosen ones. They died believing the lie their genetics forced them to believe. The genestealer infection is predetermined damnation, your fate written into your DNA before you're even born. No choice, no free will, just the certainty that one day you'll help doom your entire world and die believing it was salvation. But if you think biological weapons that target the mind are terrifying, wait until you hear about the virus that liquefies entire planetary populations in minutes. ISSTVAN3. The Life Eater virus represents one of the most horrifying weapons humanity ever created, and Horus used it to kill his own sons. Before the Imperium had cyclonic torpedoes, before most modern exterminatus weapons existed, they had virus bombs, biological weapons containing the Life Eater pathogen, a genetically engineered organism specifically designed to spread and kill at unprecedented speed. Istvan III was where the galaxy learned exactly what this weapon could do. Here's what makes the Life Eater virus uniquely terrifying. It's not just deadly, lots of weapons are deadly, it's voracious. Once released, it spreads across an entire planet's surface in minutes. Not hours, not days. Minutes. It can penetrate power armor. It can bypass rebreathers and environmental seals. Space Marines in full battle plate died from this virus. The virus attacks all biological cellular structures indiscriminately. Every living thing it touches begins to rapidly break down at the molecular level. Human bodies, animals, insects, plants, bacteria, everything organic. Victims don't just die, they liquefy. Their flesh rots and breaks down into an undifferentiated organic sludge. Imagine watching forests rot into lakes of biological matter in real time. Jungles that stood for centuries reduced to bubbling pools of biochemical soup. The biomass of an entire ecosystem breaking down simultaneously. The ground itself becomes covered in layers of organic sludge composed of everything that was once alive. But that's only the first stage. The rapid breakdown of all this organic matter releases massive amounts of gas, methane primarily, along with other highly flammable compounds. These gases build up in the atmosphere, creating a planet-wide reservoir of explosive material. Then comes the firestorm. Either the gas ignites spontaneously from the sheer volume, or an incendiary device is deliberately deployed to trigger it. The entire atmosphere catches fire, planet-wide. An apocalyptic firestorm that sears the surface to bare rock and burns away most of the oxygen. The few structures that survive the initial virus attack get incinerated in temperatures hot enough to turn sand into glass. Horus deployed this weapon against Istvan III to eliminate the loyalist elements in his own legions. The Space Marines he couldn't trust, the ones who might resist his betrayal, were sent to the planet's surface under false pretenses. Then he virus bombed them from orbit. Thousands of Space Marines, sons of Horus, World Eaters, Death Guard, Emperor's children, were caught in the attack. The Life Eater virus penetrated their power armor's environmental seals. Not completely, not immediately, but enough. Those who managed to seal themselves in time survived the initial pathogen release, only to face the firestorm. Imagine being in power armor designed to protect you from almost anything, and feeling the temperature inside rising. Your armor becomes an oven. The external temperature is so extreme that even your enhanced physiology struggles. Some Space Marines cooked inside their own armor. Others found deep enough shelter to survive both stages, emerging to find their planet transformed into an ash-covered hellscape. Captain Garrow of the Death Guard witnessed the aftermath and escaped on the frigate Eisenstein to warn the Emperor. His description of what he saw, loyal Space Marines betrayed by their own Primarch, an entire world reduced to wasteland. The scale of Horus's treachery convinced Terra that this was no longer a localized rebellion, but the virus wasn't done killing. The survivors who sheltered deep enough faced a new nightmare. The planet's water cycle was completely disrupted. The firestorm had vaporized the oceans, creating hyperstorms and constant torrential rain. The atmosphere was choked with ash. The biosphere was collapsing in real time. Over months, Istvan III would become completely incapable of supporting human life. The Space Marines, trapped on the surface, betrayed by their Primarchs, fought a desperate guerrilla war against the traitor forces Horus sent to finish them. They fought knowing they were already dead, that even if they survived the enemy, the planet itself was dying. They fought out of pure spite and loyalty to the Emperor. The Life Eater virus continued to be used throughout the heresy. It was deployed on other worlds, used as a standard exterminatus weapon when complete planetary sterilization was required. It remained in Imperial arsenals into M41, though by then it was being replaced by more efficient weapons like cyclonic torpedoes. In 273 M41, the Stalinvast hive world was virus bombed following a genestealer infestation. Billions of humans reduced to organic sludge in minutes, then incinerated in the resulting firestorm. The Imperium considered this an acceptable solution. During the Second War for Armageddon, Planetary Governor Hermann von Straub deployed ancient virus bombs against the Orc invasion. The aged pathogens were degraded and didn't achieve complete saturation, but they still killed as many Imperial defenders as Orcs when the winds shifted. Bioweapons don't discriminate, and the Life Eater virus especially doesn't care about targeting. What makes a Life Eater virus truly disturbing isn't just what it does physically, it's what it represents. This is a weapon that reduces entire planets, billions of years of evolution, ecosystems, civilizations, to sterile rock in less than an hour. It's extinction bottled and deployed from orbit, and the Imperium considers it a tool, no different than a lasgun or a battle tank. Horus used it to kill his own sons. His gene sons, warriors who trusted him absolutely, were liquefied and burned because they remained loyal to the Emperor. That moment when the first virus bombs detonated over Istvan III was when Horus stopped being a fallen hero and became something monstrous. You don't use that weapon on your own legions unless you've already decided they're not people anymore, just obstacles to be removed. But if you think weapons of mass destruction are disturbing, wait until you hear about the siege that broke the Emperor and damned humanity for 10,000 years. The throne world burns. The siege of Terra was the moment humanity's future died. Oh, the Imperium survived. But what survived wasn't what the Emperor fought to create. It was the twisted, brutal, superstitious nightmare he spent centuries trying to prevent. Before we get to the throne room showdown everyone talks about, understand the scale of what led to that moment. Horus reached Terra with 9 traitor legions, millions of traitor Imperial Army personnel, the corrupted forces of the Dark Mechanicum, entire Titan legions sworn to chaos, and an uncountable horde of demons, cultists, mutants, and the lost and the damned. This was the single largest military force ever assembled against humanity's homeworld. On the 13th day of Secundus, the bombardment began. From orbit, Horus's fleet laid down an unrelenting barrage of missiles and energy beams. The first shell targeted the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor's personal quarters, for purely symbolic reasons. Terra's void shields and point defense systems intercepted it, but the message was clear. Horus had come to kill his father. For 30 days, the orbital bombardment continued. Traitor ships destroyed Luna's naval bases, shattered Terra's orbital defenses, and scattered the Loyalist fleet through sheer weight of numbers. The sky above Terra was filled with fire and debris. The thunder of orbital strikes shook even the battle-hardened Space Marines defending the Imperial Palace. Then the landings began. Thousands of traitor vessels crashed into Terra's surface. Loyalist defenses destroyed many, but many more landed successfully. From them poured the World Eaters, Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children, Word-Bearers, and Iron Warriors, led by their respective demon primarchs. The planet's primary spaceports became battlegrounds as traitor forces seized landing zones to deploy heavy war engines and Titans. Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, had spent years fortifying Terra for this moment. He'd created a 3-layered trench network around the Imperial Palace walls. He'd emplaced gun batteries, void shield generators, and defensive positions designed to bleed attackers for every meter. But even Dorn's genius couldn't prepare for the scale of assault Horus brought. Millions of Imperial Army conscripts were forced into those trenches with minimal training, handed a lasgun and told to hold the line against Chaos Space Marines, demons, and traitor Titans. Most died without ever seeing what killed them. The outermost trenches became mass graves as Death Guard unleashed plagues and chemical weapons. Bodies piled so high that later waves of attackers used corpses as cover. The White Scars, defying Dorn's orders, launched jet bike charges into the traitor siege camps. Jagatai Khan himself led these attacks, cutting deep into enemy formations before being wounded by a warp-tainted poison blade. Sanguinius had to sortie from the palace with his sanguinary guard to rescue the Khan. The Primarchs themselves were bleeding. The Imperium's finest were being ground down through attrition. Meanwhile, deep beneath the palace, the Emperor sat on the Golden Throne, not leading his forces, not inspiring his defenders, trapped. The Golden Throne had been intended as a gateway into the Webway, humanity's path to escaping dependence on warp travel. Magnus's warning about Horus's betrayal had shattered that project, and now demons constantly pushed through the damaged Webway gate. The Emperor couldn't leave the throne. If he did, demons would flood Terra from below. So he sat there, maintaining psychic wards, battling demons in the Immaterium, while his sons died defending the walls above. The master of mankind locked in his basement, unable to lead the final battle for humanity's survival. The siege dragged on. The Death Guard collapsed the outer defenses. The World Eaters, led by the Diamond Primarch Angron, breached the palace walls. Cornet Titans smashed through fortifications that should have been impregnable. The Eternity Gate, the final barrier before the Sanctum Imperialis, came under direct assault. Sanguinius defended the Eternity Gate personally, the Angel of Baal standing alone against an endless tide of traitors. He killed thousands, fought demons and Chaos Space Marines in single combat while his blood angels died around him. He held, but everyone knew it was temporary. Eventually, the gate would fall. Eventually, the traitors would reach the Emperor, and the Emperor couldn't leave the throne. Then Horus made his gambit. He lowered the void shields on his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Whether this was a moment of regret, a personal challenge, or desperation as loyalist reinforcements approached, accounts differ. But the opening was detected, and the Emperor made his choice. He rose from the Golden Throne. Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, units of Custodes, Imperial Fists, and Blood Angels teleported to the Vengeful Spirit. Horus scattered them throughout his massive warship using warp powers. They fought through corrupted hallways hunting for the War Master while the siege continued below. Sanguinius found Horus first. The two brothers, once closest of all the Primarchs, fought before the door to Horus's throne room. Sanguinius, already exhausted from holding the Eternity Gate, wounded, pushed beyond mortal limits, still refused to join Chaos. Horus, empowered by all four Chaos gods, killed his brother, broke his body, and threw it aside. The Emperor arrived to find Sanguinius dead, the angel he loved as a son, murdered by the War Master he loved as a son. And then the Emperor fought Horus. Accounts of that duel are fragmentary, contradictory, mythologized. What's certain is that the Emperor held back at first. He didn't want to kill Horus. Even after everything, the betrayal, the heresy, the millions dead, the Emperor still hoped to save his favored son. That hesitation cost him everything. Horus, channeling the power of the Chaos Gods, wounded the Emperor grievously, mortally. Only when the Emperor realized Horus was truly lost, that nothing of his son remained, did he unleash his full psychic might. He didn't just kill Horus, he obliterated him. Destroyed not just his body but his soul across every level of reality, erased him so completely that even the Chaos Gods couldn't resurrect him. But the damage was done. The Emperor's body was shattered. His sons brought him back to Terra, back to the Golden Throne, and there he's remained for 10,000 years. Barely alive, his consciousness split between his decaying body and the Immaterium. 1,000 psychers are sacrificed daily to keep him functioning. Their souls burned as fuel for his existence. The Imperium won the siege of Terra. Horus was dead, the traitor legions broken and fleeing into the Eye of Terror, but the Emperor, the guiding light of humanity, was reduced to a corpse on a throne. His dream of a rational, secular Imperium, free from superstition, died in that throne room. Without his direct guidance, the Imperium became exactly what he fought against, a brutal theocracy that worships him as a god. The Chaos Gods won. Not the military victory, but something worse. They turned the Imperium into a machine that generates suffering and despair, feeding them for 10 millennia. The Siege of Terra wasn't humanity's victory. It was the moment humanity's hope died and survival became the only goal. But at least Terra survived. Some worlds aren't so fortunate. Some worlds die screaming while their defenders refuse to yield even as the planet breaks apart beneath them. Cadia stands no more. The planet broke before the Guard did. That's what the survivors say. And technically, it's true. But understanding what broke Cadia requires understanding what Cadia was. For 10,000 years, Cadia stood at the edge of the Eye of Terror, the fortress world that held back the tide of chaos. Every single citizen was trained from birth to be a soldier. The Cadian shock troopers were the finest military force in the Astra Militarum, renowned across the galaxy for discipline, tactical excellence, and unbreakable courage. Cadian became synonymous with elite infantry, but Cadia's true importance wasn't military, it was the pylons, ancient Necron structures scattered across the planet, generating a field that suppressed the warp. These pylons created a stable passage through what should have been impossible warp turbulence, the Cadian Gate, the only reliable route in or out of the Eye of Terror. For millennia, Cadia controlled access to the largest warp storm in the galaxy. The pylons also prevented the Eye of Terror from expanding. As long as they stood, chaos was contained. The War Master Abaddon understood this. Every one of his 13 Black Crusades had a hidden objective: destroy worlds rich in Blackstone, weaken the barriers between reality and the warp, and eventually destroy Cadia itself. The 13th Black Crusade was the culmination of 10,000 years of planning. Abaddon brought out everything: the full might of the Black Legion, traitor titans, demon engines, cultists numbering in the billions, and a Blackstone fortress, one of the ancient pre-imperial superweapons that could shatter planets. Cadia's defenders held. Against overwhelming odds, against traitor space marines and demons, against orbital bombardment and ground assault, they held. Lord Castellan or Sarkar Creed personally coordinated the defense, moving regiments with tactical genius that kept Abaddon's forces at bay. Saint Celestine herself manifested to lead counterattacks. The Cadian pylons held firm, stabilizing reality even as chaos pressed against it. So Abaddon changed tactics. He couldn't take Cadia by force. The defenders were too skilled, too determined, too well fortified. So he stopped trying to capture it. He crashed the Will of Eternity, his Blackstone fortress, into the planet. The impact was catastrophic. Fragments of the massive fortress slammed into Cadia, shattering the planetary crust. Tectonic plates fractured. The pylons overloaded and damaged faltered, and the Eye of Terror surged outward. Mass evacuation was ordered. Approximately 3 million Cadians escaped aboard the Phalanx and other vessels. 3 million out of billions. Most were left behind as the planet literally broke apart beneath them. Lord Castellan Creed stayed on Cadia, coordinating the evacuation even as his world died. He was last seen defending a position on the crumbling surface, buying time for evacuees. His final fate remains unknown. The Cadians who remained fought to the last. As earthquakes shattered cities, as the ground opened into chasms, as the sky turned purple with warp energy bleeding through, they fought. Because that's what Cadians do. They hold the line. Even when there's no line left to hold, even when the planet beneath them is coming apart, they hold. Cadia stands, they transmitted, even as the world died. Cadia stands. A declaration of defiance in the face of apocalypse. The planet broke before the guard did. That's not propaganda. That's literally what happened. The physical matter of the planet fractured and broke apart before the soldiers on its surface surrendered. But Cadia's destruction had consequences far beyond one world. The pylon's destruction allowed the Eye of Terror to expand unchecked. The suppression field that had held back the warp for 10,000 years disappeared, and reality itself tore open. The Cicatrix Maledictum began with Cadia's death, the galaxy's greatest fortress world, reduced to fragments and debris. Cadia no longer exists as a place. In character creation screens for Warhammer games, it's listed as dust. Literal dust. The world itself is gone, but Cadian culture survived. The 3 million who escaped spread across the Imperium, bringing their military traditions with them. The planet broke before the guard did, became their motto. Cadian regiments that were off-world when their planet died now fight with even greater fury, knowing they're the last of their kind. Their homeworld is gone, but the guard endures. Abaddon achieved his goal. Cadia fell. The Eye of Terror expanded. The 13th Black Crusade succeeded where 12 others failed. But the War Master discovered something important. You can destroy Cadia, but you can't break Cadians. They're still out there, still fighting, still refusing to yield. The planet may be dust, but the spirit of Cadia endures in every soldier who remembers what was lost. And what was lost was everything. Because when Cadia fell, the pylons failed, and the Eye of Terror expanded unchecked. It didn't stop expanding. It kept going and going, until the entire galaxy split in half. The galaxy split. The Cicatrix Maledictum. The Great Rift. The galaxy's cursed scar. The moment reality itself gave up pretending it could hold back the warp. Before I explain what it is, understand what it means. The Warhammer 40,000 setting spent decades in a state of perpetual 1 minute to midnight. The Imperium was always on the verge of collapse but never quite falling. Chaos was always threatening but never quite winning. That ended with the Great Rift. This isn't a threat. This is the apocalypse. Ongoing, permanent, and impossible to fix. The Great Rift is a massive chain of warp storms that tore the galaxy literally in half following Cadia's destruction. It stretches from the Eye of Terror in the west to the eastern fringe, a wound in reality so vast it's visible from anywhere in the galaxy. To those on the western side, the Imperium Sanctus, it appears as a ghastly purple scar across the heavens. To those on the eastern side, the Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, it's exponentially worse. The rift divided the Imperium into two almost entirely isolated halves. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guides ships through warp travel, barely reaches into the Imperium Nihilus. Worlds on that side can't reliably navigate. They are cut off from Terra, from reinforcement, from any certainty that the Imperium even still exists. Imagine being a planetary governor and watching that purple scar open across the sky, watching communications go dead, watching the guiding light you've relied on your entire life fade to almost nothing. Warp travel, already dangerous, became exponentially more so. The tides of the immaterium went completely chaotic. Ships that enter the warp near the rift might emerge centuries late, or centuries early, or not at all. Time works differently inside warp storms. Some worlds experienced centuries in an instant. Others were frozen in temporal stasis. Still others suffered constant temporal shifts. Morning to night to morning again in hours. Seasons changing randomly, time itself becoming meaningless. Demons pour through the rift constantly. Reality is thin along its length. Chaos incursions that would normally require complex rituals and specific conditions now happen spontaneously. Entire worlds have fallen to demonic invasion without warning, their populations slaughtered or corrupted before they even understood what was happening. Different species have different names for it. And those names tell you what it means to them. The orcs call it Gork's Grin because from their perspective, this means more fighting. Perfect. The Tau call it Muntiheva, the Devourer of Hope, because millions of Tau died in the stellar storms and their colonies were devastated. The careful expansion of the Tau Empire hit a wall of literal chaos, and hope, their defining characteristic, was devoured. The Eldar call it the Dathedian and are desperately trying to repair real space. The Great Rift threatens their webway, making some sections completely impassable. They fear it could destroy the webway entirely, which would doom them as surely as the Fall did. Even the Drukhari hiding in Kamarach are threatened. The barriers between reality and the warp are weakening everywhere. The Necrons are largely unaffected. They don't use warp travel and are immune to demonic corruption, but even they recognize the rift as a threat. The Silent King Sarek returned and began establishing the Pariah Nexus, an anti-warp pylon network designed to cover entire regions. The Necrons, who created the original pylons on Kadiak, are trying to reimpose order on reality itself. For the Imperium, the division is catastrophic. The Imperium Sanctus can still coordinate, still receive the Astronomican's light, still function somewhat normally. The Imperium Nihilus is on its own. Dante, chapter master of the Blood Angels, was appointed by Guilliman as regent of the Dark Imperium. That appointment was necessary because someone needed to command the defense of half the galaxy that's effectively isolated from central authority. The Indomitus Crusade, Robout Guilliman's massive military effort to reunify the Imperium, managed to establish some passages through the rift. The Nachman Gauntlet, a narrow corridor near the Eye of Terror, allows limited travel between Sanctus and Nihilus, but it's dangerous, contested, and unreliable. Most travel between the two halves is impossible. Think about what this means at the human level. Billions of Imperial citizens on Nihilus worlds don't know if Terra still exists. They don't know if the Emperor still watches over them. They see that purple scar in the sky and receive no answers. Some worlds have descended into anarchy. Others have doubled down on faith, interpreting the rift as a test. Still others have fallen to chaos, believing the Imperium has already fallen, and they might not be wrong. The Great Rift represents potential total failure for the Imperium. Not inevitable. Gilliman's return and the Primer Space Marines provide hope, but the galaxy is fundamentally broken in a way it wasn't before. Pre-Rift, the Imperium was declining. Post-Rift, the Imperium is actively fragmenting. The origins of the Rift remain debated. Was it purely the destruction of the Cadian pylons? Was it Magnus's sorcery during the siege of Fenris? The awakening of Inead? The ruinous powers reacting to Guilliman's resurrection? Guilliman theorizes that Abaddon strategically destroyed Blackstone-rich worlds over 10,000 years, with Cadia's fall as the final trigger. Whatever the cause, the effect is permanent. The Great Rift changed the Warhammer 40,000 setting from perpetually on the brink to actively apocalyptic. This isn't something that will be resolved. This is the new state of the galaxy. Half in darkness, reality itself wounded. Time and space unreliable. Demons everywhere. The grimdark setting got darker. The galaxy that had only war now has war plus existential reality failure. And the most disturbing part? This might be as good as it gets. The rift could expand further. The Imperium could fragment more. Chaos could gain more ground. The Warhammer 40,000 setting has always been about decline, but the Great Rift is decline made manifest. A literal tear, in reality symbolizing that everything humanity built is coming apart. The planet broke before the Guard did, but the galaxy just broke. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.